On this channel, we often talk about beautiful designs of vehicles that were sold in the United States, including some of the vehicles that you see here, the 66 Olds Tornado there in the foreground, the Buick Riviera, and the 67 Eldorado there increasingly in the background. This trio represents arguably the pinnacle of General Motors design, perhaps ever, certainly in the 1960s. But there were a number of other vehicles that were produced overseas that were not sold in the U.S. that really had an overall just beautiful design. And we're going to talk about a couple of those vehicles today, more specifically the 1972 to 1977 Opel Rekord D and Commodore B. These were two vehicles that were sold by Opel during that time period. And for those who were around in the United States during the 70s, you may recall that Buick dealers actually sold a number of Opel vehicles during that time period, including the Opel GT, which, by the way, is an absolutely gorgeous car as well, and the Opel Manta, among other vehicles from Opel. But two that never made it stateside were the Rekord D and Commodore B, and we're going to talk a little bit more about those two vehicles now because I think they're some of the most beautiful vehicles that General Motors ever produced, and they're largely unknown, at least stateside. So let's discuss them a little bit now. The first thing to note is that the Rekord D and Commodore B, along with other Opels of the time period, were actually designed by a pretty famous American designer by the name of Chuck Jordan. Chuck Jordan later rose to become General Motors Vice President of Design in the late 80s through early 1990s. But back at this time, he was sent to Adam Opel AG to become the leader of their design studios. This was during a period where General Motors was trying to purposefully rotate some Americans through Opel design, in part because General Motors styling vice president Bill Mitchell believed that they could help inject a little bit of flair into Opel, which really was producing, in the words of Bob Lutz, boring cars for boring people. The first American to go over to Opel as a styling leader was a man by the name of Claire McKeegan, who had worked in General Motors design for many years in the United States. McKeegan designed a number of beautiful Opels. Perhaps the best was the Diplomat Coupe that was produced from 1965 to 1967 in quite limited numbers and built by Carman. It also had a 327 racing engine under hood, just an absolutely gorgeous vehicle. But as you can tell, it has some American flair associated with it. Well, interestingly, Claire McKeegan was actually not Bill Mitchell's first choice to go over to Opel. A man by the name of Irv Rabicki was. But at the time, General Motors was just starting these expat assignments, and the thought was that someone would be sent from the States to Germany and really live out the rest of their career there. And that was just something that Irv Rabicki wasn't willing to do. And so he turned the job down. By the time Claire McKeegan accepted it, it was more of a rotational assignment. And that's why Claire McKeegan was there for several years. And then, after Claire McKeegan, Chuck Jordan became the design leader for Adam Opel. And when Jordan arrived, he inherited a quite American-styled Opel Rekord C, as an example, vehicle that displayed a number of styling traits that were very typical of the time, especially for General Motors, including that so-called Coke bottle shape where the body flares out around the rear wheels, upward and outward. You can see it here in this particular photo. That, again, was a very American trend that came into vogue in the early to mid-1960s, and this Rekord C was produced from around August of 1966 through the end of 1971. It's not an ugly car, but let's see what Chuck Jordan developed with the design team. Take a look at this Rekord D coupe, and you can see the styling has been significantly modernized. And what was going on at the time in Europe in particular was that a number of beautiful designs with this so-called sheer look, very sheer surfaces, no Coke bottle shapes, thin roofs, big daylight opening or greenhouses were coming into vogue during that time period. And I would say one of the leading designers of the time in Europe was Giorgetto Giugiaro, who designed a number of beautiful vehicles during that time period, including the beautiful De Tomaso Mangusta. Take a look at it here. It was produced from 1967 to 1971. as well as the Isophidia, just a gorgeous sedan. Giugiaro and others were really setting new styling trends. Some beautiful vehicles, even the Fiat 130s, were another great-looking car. And eventually, this design language would even flow stateside as Cadillac introduced the 76 Seville with a similar sheer look, although with a bit more American form to it. And the 1977 Caprice and Impala, as well as the General Motors full-size lineup, would continue that so-called sheer look. But over in Europe is where this look really started, arguably birthed by designers like Giugiaro. And Chuck Jordan really wanted to have Opel take part in some of the design renaissance that was happening in Europe. Thus, the Rekord D and Commodore B. As you can see here, the Rekord D was just a beautiful car. And the way to think about the Rekord and the Commodore is that a Commodore is kind of an up-level Rekord that had a six-cylinder engine in it as opposed to various four-cylinder engines, whether gas or diesel, in the Rekord. And the Rekord was a very successful vehicle in terms of sales. In its 5.5-year production run, 1.1 million of them were produced. So these vehicles were found all over Germany and Europe, and it's no surprise why in looking at it. Notice the styling, though, of the Rekord D and how different it is from the Rekord C. No more Coke bottle, much thinner-looking roof, a bit more sheer overall surfaces, a newly introduced Hofmeister kink there on the C-pillar, an homage to BMW styling, and beautiful slight tumble home to the vehicle, clean body sides, somewhat fuselage looking in their overall form. Just overall absolutely gorgeous vehicles. And here's a picture of an Opel Commodore B, again produced from 1972 to 1977, similar to the Rekord D, but again, just an absolutely gorgeous coupe. And here in the Commodore Bs, you've got a bigger engine, a six-cylinder, either 2.5 or 2.8 liters in this case, as opposed to the Rekord D that just had four-cylinder engines ranging from about 1.7 liters all the way up to a 2-liter diesel. And there were different gas and diesel variants that were available in the Rekord D. But the hot vehicle, again, was the Commodore B, 2.5 to 2.8 liter six-cylinder engines. That on the upper end, there was actually a fuel-injected 2.8 engine that I think made around 160 horsepower. So it was quite powerful. It wasn't quite as powerful as the 3-liter Fuelis from BMW at the time. But if you were going on the Autobahn, you certainly had a very respectable Autobahn cruiser. Now, the other great design element about these vehicles was the interiors, which, as you can see here, were just super clean, tasteful, handsome. Had some interesting features for the time, including an IP that wrapped into the door, as you can see there at the corners of the IP. And take a look at the beautiful gauges, kind of your typical 2-round dial, speedometer, tachometer. And you also have a full complement of gauges there, oil pressure, fuel, engine temperature, etc., so that you actually know what's happening with the engine. I also love how the center console is beautifully integrated into the dashboard as opposed to just purely floating. It gives the car just a seamless feel on the interior. And you get a bit of a Mercedes-Benz-y 4-spoke steering wheel there too. Here's a more holistic picture of the interior, and you can see it from a bit further back. Again, absolutely beautiful. I do love one element that you can really see in this picture a bit better, and that is that the speaker for the radio is disguised as part of the center console there. I think it's just a great integration, and it makes sense. I guess you can hear the sound pretty well. It's coming from the center of the vehicle. Now, while I could expound to a greater degree on the design of the Opel Rekord and Commodore B, I think it's better to hear a first-hand account of how the design came into being. And let's turn to an interview that I had with Bob Lutz regarding this particular topic. Here, Bob discusses his relationship with Chuck Jordan and also the design of the Rekord D and Commodore B, including a variant of the Commodore that never made it through to production, but which designers and Bob felt was absolutely gorgeous. Bob served as Opel's sales leader during this time before being hired away by BMW, where he would introduce a number of vehicles there, including the first 3 Series, the original M cars, and even introduce the BMW nomenclature. Let's listen in to Bob tell the story of the Opel design for these vehicles. You look at the portfolio, everything from the GT in, I think, 1968.
That was another tough one.
And you have the Ascona, the Manta, the Rekord D, the Chuck Jordan cars too.
Yeah, beautiful cars.
How did that design evolution come about?
All right, I've been discussing this one a lot lately with former GM designers, but Chuck Jordan was a great designer, but very American in his orientation. He very much liked DLOs that were like this, and half vinyl roofs capped at the end, and vinyl roofs that didn't come over the edge but had a little chrome bead before the drip rail. And he just loved that stuff. And he came to Opel and he says, here's what's wrong with you guys. You need a little pizzazz. And he started taking the cars, and I said, Chuck, listen, let me try to help you understand European design. And he had been indoctrinated by Bill Mitchell, who said, there is no such thing as European design and American design. There is good design and bad design, period. And American design, as practiced by General Motors, is good, and what the Europeans are doing is pure crap. And I suppose, seen through American eyes, he was right, but the Europeans weren't seeing it through American eyes. They were seeing it through European eyes, and a more subdued, cleaner, less ornamented, tighter execution spoke functionality and engineering excellence, and sent all kinds of subliminal messages to the European customer that, frankly, the average American designer didn't understand. So I wrote Chuck Jordan a long treatise, which I did all by hand, and I included pictures of a De Tomaso Mangusta and an Isophidia, and etc. All the good Giorgio Giugiaro stuff. And then I did a lot of sketches of American roofline, exaggerated flowing C-pillars, and then European roofline, very, very crisp, and American DLO, very tight, high belt line, thick roof. Then European belt line tend to skive down from the front door mirror, and then a very thin roof with a slight arc to the top, and a very thin roof. I sent it to him, and I didn't hear anything for about 4 days. And then he called me over to design. He said, close the door, and I did, and he said, let me tell you something. I got your 10-page thing, and I read it, and I internalized it. And I'm telling you, don't you ever try to teach me about design again. Is that understood? Because you're a marketing guy, and I'm a professional designer, and you don't know anything about my business. Is that clear? I said, yes, Chuck, it's clear. He says, having said that, you make a lot of excellent points in there.
So he acquiesced a little bit then.
Yeah. And then he said, I get it as far as that Italian design is concerned. I'm going to go down. I've already made the contact. I'm going to go down and see Giugiaro. I'm going to meet him. I'm going to see what he's doing. And the two of them became fast friends. And then Chuck Jordan told me, he says, the next Rekord Commodore I'm going to do, I'm going to out Giugiaro. So.
Well, they came out gorgeous, not just on the outside, but even the inside.
Everything. That car was near perfect.
That black IP that kind of wraps into the doors too.
It was fantastic. It was a fantastic execution. And the one that all the GM designers, retired designers remember, and I remember, which we were never able to sell because of the additional investment, was the Commodore, which had the 6-cylinder engine, which fit under the hood. But design and I wanted about 5 inches more hood length. And that Commodore coupe with the additional 5 inches hood was to die for. I mean, it was fantastic. It took it into another class. And we kept throwing it to top management and to the finance guys. And they said, yeah, it's nice, but so what, you know.
Easy, Bob, the finance guys, right? Yeah. But you got the Commodore A through, right? And eventually, yeah.
Well, that was the Commodore A, but it was the B that had the nice body.
Yes.
And that was the one where we wanted to extend the front end also to pull it away from the Rekord, because other than grill and trim, they were really identical. And we never sold that, which was a shame, but the Commodore did all right. And Opel went from being the sloths of the Autobahn that the guys in Mercedes-Benzes and BMWs kept having to figuratively sweep out of the left lane, suddenly became dominant. And if you had a Commodore GSE with the 150 horsepower fuel-injected 6, that was faster than, well, maybe a BMW, the 6 series and the big ones, the six cylinders, 3 liter, 3 liter fuelies that had, I think, 200 horsepower. They were slightly faster. But other than that, you were faster on the Autobahn than any BMW or Mercedes-Benz around. So it made Opels respectable.
And there you have it. Hope you enjoyed this design segment on the Opel Rekord D and Commodore B. If you did, please drop a comment and be sure to like and subscribe. Thanks again. And until next time, take care.